right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on publications and posters, the how-to of getting one done. My name is Larissa DeLuna with the American Heart Association, and I'll be moderating for this afternoon. First, a few housekeeping rules. Everyone's lines have been muted on the back end to avoid background noise. If you'd like to come off mute during the webinar, please use *6 to ask a question. We also have the question asking functionality from GoToMeeting, so feel free to type in a question from there also. Our first speaker is going to be Louise McCullough, so I'll go ahead and give Louise an introduction. Louise is the professor of neurology and neurosciences at the University of Connecticut Health Center and the Stroke Center at Hartford Hospital. She is a clinical scientist with a specific interest in the gender differences in stroke and vascular disease. While spending several months a year at one of the busiest stroke services in New England, she supervises multiple clinical projects using well-established stroke center databases. Louise's clinical academic interests have been through the development of emergent therapies for acute, ischemic, and hemorrhagic stroke, neurological residency education in stroke care, and the creation of a regional stroke network, and the largest in southern New England. Louise obtained her undergraduate and graduate training at the University of Connecticut and then came to the University of Connecticut Health Center, where she obtained her MD in 1996. She completed her graduate training in neurology and stroke at Johns Hopkins. Dr. McCullough was recruited in 2004 by UCHC to start a clinical and research program in stroke, and has been promoted to a full-time professorship in 2012. Louise, I'll go ahead and make you the presenter and take over. You can unmute your line with *6 also.
So am I muted or not muted?
I got you. I can hear you now, so we're good.
Okay, there you go. I love to be in control of the meeting. That's awesome. All right, let's see if I can. I'm trying to pull up my slides.
Oh, let's see.
I think you might have to do that.
Yeah, let me show them, and let's go ahead. Hold on.
Hopefully you won't get my desktop with like 10,000 pictures of all my kids on it. We can look at those too.
Oh, hold on.
And I'm not sure how many are on the line or what their kind of level of experience is with posters or abstracts, but you guys certainly chime in. These are always much better if they're kind of almost like a conference call kind of thing. If you guys have questions, I don't think there's huge numbers on the line, so you can certainly stop and ask me. And we can, we don't have to go through all the slides or, follow the slides. I just wanted to give you a quick intro of how to write an abstract and start with an abstract and then a poster and then maybe even a paper. Should I be pressing anything?
No, I'm trying to get it to come up. Let's see.
It's always technology.
Yep.
You just dismissed me.
Yes, so I'm going to try and let's do it.
Wow, I lasted 3 minutes before they cut me off. I don't know if I should sign back in or...
Go ahead and sign back in. Sorry, you guys, for the technical difficulties.
Let me try. They were up there. I saw them.
Yeah.
Can you guys see my desktop? I'm just making sure it's not behind here now. Should I show my screen?
Let's see now. Can everyone see the slides?
I can't.
You can?
I cannot.
Not.
Can anybody else? *6.
I can't see them either.
Okay, there are people on the line. Yeah, I don't see them. I can sign off.
Oh, do you have your copy of the slides?
I do. Do you want me to?
Let's go ahead and go from there then.
All right, let me see if this works.
Sorry, everyone.
I got 10,000 things on my desktop. Let me see. Let's see if this works. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Everybody see that? If yes, I'll just use this.
Yes, we can all see him.
All right.
Yes.
Thank y'all.
You guys can certainly email me. Everybody knows my email. It's on Google, I think. But if you want to email me or get a copy of the slides, you can. So this webinar is really how to use your data, and it's sponsored by the Southwest Affiliate. And really just trying to emphasize how much available data you have and that you may be able to use to start actually doing some clinical research. And it's very daunting when you begin to think, oh, you know, can I do an abstract? So I'll kind of take you through it. It's not easy, and it is a lot of extra work on top of, I'm sure, of what you do already, but it's very satisfying. For example, we have a physician's assistant at Hartford Hospital named Kent who started looking first with a case report of this non-ischemic cardiomyopathy and subarachnoid hemorrhage. He got so fired up, he got a case report accepted in a very local journal, Connecticut Medicine, and that triggered him to look at our database, which triggered him to do a prospective trial, which has now triggered him to apply for an AHA grant. So it can be very satisfying. All right. My only disclosure is I'm on the Speakers Bureau for TPA. So the goals for this webinar are to learn how to ask a meaningful scientific question. Sometimes the hardest thing is coming up with something that's important but hasn't already been thought of or published on. I want you to at least know what the null hypothesis means. I'm not going to go through a lot of like stats and things, but just so you can design your experiment to ask a testable question. If you don't ask the proper question in the beginning, the study can be doomed from the start. Then I'll show you a couple examples of a couple successful abstracts and an example of how to design your study. We'll talk very briefly about poster presentation and then publication. So these are all very stepwise. First is kind of like a presentation, then maybe an abstract, then maybe, you know, it's very stepwise. The publication thing, especially peer review, is difficult. So what I would recommend to not get you frustrated is start small. And this is what I tell Kent and Dawn Beelan. There's a lot of nursing staff that are now involved with clinical research. Start with a local presentation, maybe something not even written, but something you want to target either to your ER. So you can, you know, get comfortable with PowerPoint. Say you think there's some systemic issue going on in your ER that's delaying your treatment times, or should we do door to CT, or should they go triage first? This is all stuff that you can ask in your hospital, and you can actually track data. After that, I usually recommend like some sort of educational forum where maybe you give a presentation to fellow nurses, staff, or residents. And then down in the Southwest region, as I understand, like we have up here for trauma centers, you do have these regionalized networks of stroke care. So that actually increases the power of your study a lot because you can increase the N, which is the number of people or events, and you're taking it out of your specific hospital system. Like, so when we publish on our data from Hartford, because we have a very large database of 7,000 patients, the concern is always, well, that's the way you do it at Hartford, but how about Yale? So unless you can compare those two hospitals directly, it does kind of weaken the study a little bit. You guys are lucky in the fact that you can get data from other hospitals. Then you want to go to, after a regional hospital meeting or a regional meeting, you can think about a national meeting. The one I usually recommend is the International Stroke Meeting, but there are many other venues, like the Neuroscience Nursing Meeting. That's a great meeting for nurses. And then finally, publication. And there's a lot of journals out there targeted for stroke and targeted for education and targeted for community education or nursing. So you just have to find the right journal. And a lot of that is just going through PubMed and Google and putting in like Clinical Nursing Stroke Journal, and a few will come up. Always try and make it PubMed, which means that if somebody goes into the PubMed search engine, they'll be able to find your paper. All right, and you guys feel free to interrupt me, otherwise I feel like I'm just talking to myself. So first of all, you have to be realistic with what resources you have. And I can't tell you what resources you have, but there are certain things that you may have in your hospital that you're underutilized or you're not really aware. Like I had no idea Hartford was keeping track of this huge infectious database for iatrogenic infections and hospital-acquired pneumonias, which they have to do by law. So sometimes there's these big data sets that we don't even know that are available and that you have access to. So if there is a research department or, you know, I know many of you get with the guidelines, find out who's keeping that data. Regulatory databases, things like Get With The Guidelines. There's a tremendous amount of data in Get With The Guidelines. And the data that you're entering, that's your data. So feel free to use it. I also would recommend that you find a mentor that has experience. That can sometimes be the most difficult thing because people are busy, but if you really show an interest, you will find a good mentor that is willing to spend time helping you design a project and get it published, whether it's only an abstract form or a poster form, but really you need a mentor with some kind of expertise. That person can be a neurologist, that person can be an internal medicine, that person can be an epidemiologist or in your clinical research. Sometimes even fellows and residents. If you're just starting doing research and you've never even written an abstract, fellows and residents can actually be very good kind of partners in crime because they're learning too. You can also think about case reports. That's a nice way to get published. It kind of gets you used to doing kind of the whole more scientific vigor. So if you see an interesting patient that's very unique, you can go to PubMed and see, has anybody ever described this syndrome? And certainly those are a little bit easier. Get With The Guidelines and HA affiliates. I know the Southwest affiliate does have some resources in epidemiology, which I think is the most difficult for clinical research. If you guys haven't done clinical research, trying to figure out like how to do the stats and getting somebody to help you with the statistics is key. And some DPH and HA affiliates do have that support. So the major issue is learn the difference between a descriptive study that kind of describes associations versus a hypothesis-driven study. So at the very beginning of your research, you really have to have a very clear hypothesis in mind. So an example would be increase in TPA use and an increase in hospitals' community education efforts. So you could say, okay, we're now giving 6 community talks about TPA, and look, our TPA rate has gone from 3% to 6%. That may be true, and completely unrelated. So a better question or a way to guide that would be to see if the people who are getting TPA treatment had any exposure to those educational efforts. And we know TPA rates are going up nationwide, and a lot of that is for multiple reasons. So that is very hard to prove that your educational efforts would influence something like a TPA rate. Okay, there's a very good web link by, I believe it's a nurse at the University of Michigan that I have written down here that I think will be very helpful. So before you start, review, so I'm going to assume that this is for an abstract, and that's where I recommend you all start if you haven't published before. A local or an affiliate kind of like a hospital research day is a good opportunity. So they'll often give you a call for abstracts. So they'll say, oh, we want abstracts for our clinical research day at Hospital X. So you have to know what the purpose of the meeting is. Who is the audience? Because you want to tailor your abstract to something that will be of interest. If it's all quality initiative nurses, then you probably want to do a quality initiative project. Always try and follow the format, including the word limit. Is the abstract submitted by paper? Is it electronic? Is there a website? Are they open to only database studies or only completed studies? Because sometimes you can put an abstract that the stroke meeting is the classic example. They asked for it in August, and the meeting isn't until February, so you've never actually finished what your abstract's on. Importantly, you have to realize it takes time to write. You have to plan ahead and start early. So if the abstract due date is next week, it's really difficult to make it. And you often need a lot of analysis and input from others, and that also takes time. Sometimes the longest time to get one of these kind of papers together, and I'll give you an example of one I did with Rita, who works at the American Heart up in Maine, it took longer for us to kind of communicate than to do the actual research. Experience helps. Get a mentor, get a colleague, work with research administration. Review examples of other abstracts. So the Northeast Cerebrovascular Consortium website has several examples of how to write a successful abstract and how to develop a successful poster, because we recognize that some people don't have this experience. Don't go over length that annoys reviewers. Proofread it very carefully. Run-on sentences, grammatical errors, they make you look sloppy. And if your writing looks sloppy, then they're going to assume that your data analysis is sloppy. Follow the font guides. Watch abbreviations, because they can make it very difficult for the abstract to be read. Try and be as scientific as possible. One of the things I think is very difficult for people is recognizing that scientific writing is not the same as, like, your college English or high school English class. It's not flowery. It's not descriptive. It is short and succinct as possible. If you have numbers or data, that always helps, because then it looks like it's kind of a more robust project. So the parts of an abstract, and this is true also for publications, any publication, is there's a title, there's a background, there's an objective, purpose, aim, there's methods, results, and conclusions. And I put these in bigger font because those are probably the things that really sell your abstract. As an abstract reviewer for numerous meetings, if I see something where there's a lot of background, I know that they're kind of padding the abstract because they don't have much actual data, okay? Most abstracts have these kind of structured things that give you some kind of clue about how they want it. I usually use main headings to separate the parts of the abstract, and that's true for papers as well. So this method makes the abstract easier to read, identifies the parts of your study, emphasizes your point and conclusions, and it makes reviewers happy because it's easier to read, which makes you happy, because if the reviewers are happy, they'll take your abstract. When you get to if an abstract is accepted, you can either give a oral talk, which I actually think are sometimes easier, or you will make a poster. We're making our posters today, as a matter of fact, for IHC, for the International Stroke Meeting, and just a few words on poster style. Make sure you get the measurements correct. Most can be done as a simple PowerPoint slide, one big mega PowerPoint slide, and you can make your poster right on that and take it to Kinko's and make it be and print it. Don't use small font. It's really hard, especially because there's a crowd of people standing looking at your poster that are often 10 feet away, okay? Try not to use too much text. Liven it up with graphs and illustrations, which I'm realizing I don't have many of in this webinar, I apologize. And watch colors. There's a lot of red-green colorblind people out there, so I usually tell people to avoid those colors. So the title of the abstract, you should make it as descriptive as possible. Make it sound important. Make it sound compelling, and importantly, make it accurate and easy to read. So if there's something that I think your hospital is really hot on, or something that's in your region, like some EMS question, you want to get that into the title so it catches people's attention, okay? So you can use several examples of titles like Quality of Life Among Stroke Survivors. Well, it's about quality of life, and it's about stroke, but it's a little bit vague. So, or would you use Depression and Functional Status Predict Quality of Life in Stroke? That's much more like, oh, that's kind of more interesting, and it's predictive. It suggests that there's some sort of analysis that's been done. And then you can ask it in question format. Do depression and functional status predict quality of life in stroke survivors? That's a much better title than this, because it really gives you a much more descriptive idea, okay? Background is usually limited to 2 to 3 sentences, so make it very specific. You can use the one general, stroke is the 4th leading cause of death and the top cause of disability as an intro sentence, but then rapidly get into your topic, okay? Information is lacking, little is known, things like that actually are good because they catch reviewers. So little is known about the relationship between X and Y, okay? So ER, time to CT, and TPA treatment times or something. So can you reduce TPA treatment time by taking the patient directly to the CAT scanner rather than going through triage? So that would be a very specific question, okay? Objective purpose, limit to 1 or 2 sentences, and they can be directly from what your study was. They should flow directly from the problem statement or the question that you identified in the background. Okay? It tells the reviewer what to expect in the rest of the abstract, and then the reviewer makes a very, very quick judgment about the importance of the topic. So if the purpose isn't clear, or if it isn't like, oh, who cares, that's been done a zillion times, your abstract's not going to get accepted. Okay? All right. So here's an example. Hypertension contributes to mortality in patients after stroke, but interventions to improve antihypertensive medication adherence in these patients are lacking. Okay, and this is the nurse example that's from the University of Michigan. So to test a nurse-based computerized intervention designed to improve adherence to antihypertensive medications and improve survival among stroke survivors. That's the objective. All right, so with methods, you want to succinctly tell the study, the design, the procedure, the sample, the measures, and what statistical test you used. The methods are critical because it will tell the reviewer what to expect in the results section, and it gives us some information about the quality and strength of the study. You really have to have numbers, not in this section, because numbers and results belong in the results section, not in the methods. But if you don't say at least a sentence or two about something like chi-squared was used or X, the t-test was used, they're going to realize that it's not a very statistically strong study. So this is this recent example, and I asked Rita this morning if I could use it. It's in process. So the title is, Where Does the Time Go? The Impact of Missingness of Symptom Onset Time on TPA Delivery in the Northeast. So she is a American Heart person up in Maine, and she's relatively by herself up there. So she had reached out to me, and we've been working on this project for a little while. The cover title is much shorter, Protocols for Documentation of Last Seen Well Times. That's what this is really about, and there's Rita's information. So this is her abstract. This is the abstract that she would put in for a conference, and this is actually the abstract of her paper. And you can read what the background is. Despite significant efforts to improve thrombolytic use in the U.S., only a small number of ischemic stroke patients are treated. So that tells you, okay, wow, that's pretty important, right? Although there are a number of contraindications to TPA, many patients are excluded due to the narrow therapeutic time window, and that's determined by the last known well time. However, it is unclear, so it's telling you there's a problem, we don't know this answer, how the last known well time is obtained and documented in the acute hospital setting. So reading that very brief 2 sentences, you know what her study's about, right? So the methods that she used is she surveyed hospitals throughout the Northeast region to determine if they had an established protocol for documenting the last known well times. And then treatment rates as reported to get with the guidelines were then compared in hospitals with and without established protocols. So now you're getting the idea a little bit that it's kind of scientific. It wasn't just a survey. It was a survey, but then they actually went and looked at the hospitals that had a protocol for last known well versus hospitals that didn't and could look at get with the guideline data. So the majority of hospitals, 73%, actually lacked established protocols for last known well documentation. Those without established protocols more often miss this variable when reporting to get with the guidelines. Because if you don't have a protocol and it's not, written in like a screen, then you're less likely to get it. And that's exactly what she found. Treatment rates were low overall, which is actually the 7% is about nationwide, although rates in patients that presented with 2 hours of symptom onset were high in hospitals, whether they had an established protocol or not. We'd love this to be 100%, by the way. But so if the patient presented within 2 hours of symptoms, it didn't really matter if these hospitals had a protocol or not. So it was kind of a negative study. Although the last known well protocol wasn't established, they were treating at the same rates. Okay? So conclusion, improved documentation of last known well time should be attempted. The addition of this variable to existing protocols could more accurately track the number of patients ineligible for treatment based on delayed presentation. And this could be very important because that might tell us that people are still coming to the hospital too late. We could then look at, who is coming late. Is there any kind of racial or ethnic kind of thing that makes somebody come late to the hospital or present late and makes them not eligible for lytics? Okay? So this is just a quick summary of what was in the paper. So you would not put all this in an abstract, but she found, and here you can see, significantly lower capture rates. That's a huge, green flag. When you see the word significant and you start seeing p-values, that tells the reviewer, whether it's for an abstract, a poster, a presentation, a paper, that this is scientifically valid because it has statistical power, okay? And they found lower capture rates, and so anyway, I'm not even going to read all this, but it tells you that there's actually some sort of data-based conclusion. Figures are important. I'm sorry there's so few in my presentation, but this is actually a figure from her paper looking at these self-designated either Department of Health, a primary stroke center, what was called an acute stroke center, which is probably in here. You can see the number that had protocol based on their designation. And I was very surprised to find so many stroke centers and primary stroke centers actually didn't have a protocol. Figures can make things very much easier to follow. All that text in the previous slide, it's kind of texty and kind of boring. And so this is a graph showing the number of hospitals surveyed here, the number of beds in each hospital. Here's the legend. So these are the smallest hospitals to the largest hospitals. And they are the number of hospitals are represented here. And it didn't make any difference, actually, if they had a larger bed size or if they were in the suburban or urban region about whether they had protocols. So that's an example of what you can do with data that you probably already have. Now, if you have an established database, this is an older example. This is an international stroke abstract. This abstract did turn into a publication for a medical student that looked at gender differences in the time of presentation to the ER and outcome in patients with acute ischemic stroke. So the title kind of tells you everything. Okay, we're going to look at sex difference, and we're going to look at time of presentation, and then your background says that there are gender discrepancies, we now actually call it sex instead of gender, in the awareness, treatment, and outcome of stroke, and the majority of deaths were in females, and there's been studies showing that women come to the emergency department much later than men. So what we wanted to do is in our own population see if this is true. Although the idea and hypothesis may not be that novel because there's been research on this, it's very good to know if there's something in your hospital that you're very interested in. I happen to be interested in sex differences in stroke, so I wanted to know in my population, in my hospital, were women getting treated as frequently with TPA and were they arriving to the hospital? Okay? So that was the point of this study, and it ended up getting published. But a lot of these studies, you have to really look in the literature and make sure that they're novel, but some of these you just do for you and for your hospital and for your administration. And administration likes clinical research, especially if it turns into even a regional abstract or a clinical research day abstract. Certainly if it turns into something that's presented at the International Stroke Meeting, that brings a lot of good publicity to your hospital. So this was the objective of the study. We looked at functional outcomes at different stages of recovery, okay? And we enrolled almost 2,200 patients. We looked at ED arrival time, NIH stroke scale, okay? 1940 of our patients had an NIH stroke scale on admission, and then we looked at people who presented before 6 hours, because obviously if it's after 6 hours, it's not. They may have been found down. There's a lot of variables, and so there wasn't that many in the final analysis. But then in the methods, you want to say the independent samples, t-tests, and again, it gives you that idea that this is kind of more statistically sound. Okay, and in our sample, we looked at these 200 plus men, 200 plus women, and we found that women were older, which has been shown in multiple studies. But if you're interested in age, oh, look, now you've thought of a whole new abstract you can work on. Onset to the ED was not differently found. We didn't find any differences in the time to be seen by a physician, time to neurology, time to CAT scan, but women did have higher NIH stroke scales. Okay, so they had worse stroke than males. And that may be why at 3 and 12 months they actually did worse than men. But obviously if you have a worse stroke when you come in, your outcome's going to be worse. So you can conclude females are older than males, they present with higher NIH stroke scales, and they have worse impairments. And we found that those last out for a year post-stroke. Women were aware of acute stroke symptoms. So again, although this study originally we thought that women would not present to the ED as quickly, nor would they be aware of their stroke symptoms, or that the doctors wouldn't see them as quickly in the ER. None of that was true, which is still important. Negative results are important. So use tables and graphs, have a strong conclusion, and know what reviewers are looking for. They don't want you to overstate what you found. So in the results, try and put data, okay? Don't say findings will be discussed. That means that your study's not done, okay? You need to ask an important question, not just does X, do Y. Like, oh, patients are older that have stroke now than they were 20 years ago. That's, not that important. We all know that, So tables and figures, save for poster. I tend not to put them in an abstract because they take up a lot of text. Okay, make a powerful visual statement, use good graphics, catch the reviewer's attention, okay? In the conclusion, do not overstate. That's the most important thing. Don't make your results appear or try to be more than they are, okay? So this one here is one last example of a question that's not clear. We tried to do a care initiative at Hartford Hospital. So this is one of these quality improvement things where we triage stroke pager calls to an activated and an inactivated system. Okay, so we were starting to look at whether we could get this published, and it turns out this quality initiative, we didn't have any quality outcome. So although we were trying to decide whether, having activated calls, increased TPA use, we didn't actually follow these patients to see if they had better outcomes or better TPA use. So we couldn't really publish that. It was very descriptive. So you have to ask a testable question, like how does use of this system increase the number of patients treated would have been a better question. Does this system improve time to treatment? Does this system spare resources, having this, activated stroke pager versus non-activated? And then you have to have data. How do you assess each of these? You must have this information. And you have to remember, a lot of this is captured by you guys already in Get With The Guidelines. So you have access to TPA treatment times and TPA treatment rates, so you should use it. So very briefly on how to do statistics. First of all, if you haven't done them before, go get help. It's very difficult for you to do this. Unless you have at least an understanding of statistics, you're not going to design your study properly, and your hypothesis isn't going to be clear. When residents and fellows and nurses and PAs come to me asking about doing research, the first thing I have them do is say, okay, well, what do you want to do research on? I want you to come up with 10 hypothesis-driven questions that you're interested in asking. And you have to write down those 10 on a piece of paper. And then we go through them, and I'll say, no, that's been done. No, we can't get the data for that. No, we can't compare this hospital and that hospital because there's no way we can compare or have access to that hospital's data. So statistics, is this difference significant? So P less than 0.05. That's kind of the classic accepted value for significance. That means that you are accepting that you are accepting a 5% false rate. So you're saying that you think TPA treatment rates will go up with this new triage system, and if you find at 0.05 that it does, there's still a this 5% chance that you're wrong, 1 out of 20. So that's kind of standard that you accept that value of error, okay? Most of the Get With The Guidelines data is entered as percentages, which means you use a test called the chi-square. Now this one, if you're interested with Get With The Guidelines, you can do this yourself. There's a very nice free program called graphpad.com, okay? I'm going to ignore that, sorry. So I want to show you, here's the Statistics 101. So here's how to use a statistical program. So a t-test compares the means of two groups. So if you're comparing like systolic blood pressure between a control and a treated group, between men and women, or any other two groups, you can use a thing called a t-test. You can do a t-test on Excel, and I know most of you have access to Excel, but that has to be a real value, okay? So you can't look at like the modified Rankin, which I'm sure you're all familiar, 0 to 6, 0, no disability, 6 is dead. You can't use a t-test on that. So say you have, men and women and a modified Rankin of 2.7 in women and 3.8 in men. You can't use a t-test for that data because it's not real data. A modified Rankin of 2 is not twice as bad as a modified Rankin of 0. You know what I mean? So it's called ordinal data. There's no, relationship between 3 and 4. It's a descriptive scale. You must use a thing called the Mann-Whitney U for those. So don't use t-tests if it's an ordinal data like a modified Rankin. Don't confuse t-test with correlation and regression. The t-test compares one variable, perhaps blood pressure, between two groups. Okay? If you want to see how two variables vary together, then you would use a correlation. Okay? Don't confuse t-test with ANOVA, and these are just, very basic things. T-test compares two groups. You cannot use a t-test if you have more than two groups. Then you have to use a thing called an ANOVA, and then you get into needing some statistical help if you're not familiar with it. Okay? Don't confuse a t-test with a chi-square. You're going to see mostly chi-square data, okay? Use a t-test to compare a continuous variable like blood pressure, 140, 150, 160, weight. Use a contingency table or a chi-square for a categorical value. Pass, fail, viable, not viable, dead, not dead, okay? And this is what you get from GraphPad. And you can actually put in your data from Get With The Guidelines. So this would be year 2008, this would be 2009, this is your hospital, percent of patients, so this is whatever, 48%, and this is 49%, so that's not going to be significantly different, okay? But it tells you, right? So you put in a numerator, a denominator, a numerator, a denominator. So say if you're asking about like number of treated patients in 2008 and 2009, you have this data from Get With The Guidelines, so you can put it right into GraphPad. So that's a chi-square, okay? You will use this data if it's Get With The Guidelines data, okay? But it's very yes, no, dead, open, yes, open, no. Get With The Guidelines is a national resource. You can use your own hospital's data. You're collecting it. You don't need to get approval from the Get With The Guidelines or the AHA. This is data that you're putting in that's being underused, in my opinion. First of all, you need to know what's in there, because if you ask a question with a hypothesis, you need to make sure the data from Get With The Guidelines is actually in the data set that you need. So there are, and a lot of it is proprietary, but you guys know what's in there because you're entering it, okay? And certainly that entering those variables are accessible. For publication, you often need more than your own hospital because of that single center bias. Like, we do it this way in this hospital doesn't mean that you do it that way in your hospital. But in the Southwest, there's, again, these regional affiliates. So you get together with a stroke coordinator or a stroke neurologist or a resident or whoever from another hospital. You then strengthen your own work because now you can combine data. Okay, and that's an example of what we've done with the Northeast Consortium, and that's why I wanted you to take you through Rita's, because that was all done with pretty much our Northeast data. And I knew I had about 30 minutes, and I'm sorry I went a little bit over. Sorry. But I wanted to just leave my email here. Okay, you guys can certainly contact me. Think about abstract dates. the stroke meeting is often due in August, so it comes up. But most importantly, I think the big message is try something. Try something simple at first. Even if it's like a nurse education PowerPoint or something that you're up on the floors and you're talking about, wow, wouldn't it be great if, patients got their swallow study in the first 6 hours. I wonder if that would decrease length of stay. You could do that, and your hospital would love it because it's kind of a quality thing, and you can get new protocols that they have to get their speech swallow within 6 hours if you find out that it, reduces length of stay. You could even, stretch out that study to say, okay, well, if they get their speech swallow early, are they more likely to have an aspiration pneumonia? Maybe we're doing it too early. So just try and think of things that are kind of novel or interesting to you. And when you first start out, it doesn't really matter if it's been published. It's got to be interesting to you. Otherwise, you're never going to finish it. Especially if things get rejected or they're not well received, you'll just give up. So ask something that you think is pertinent to your hospital and that you're interested in. There's lots of examples of posters and publications. Use PubMed to kind of get an idea of some of these references, and most places have access to it. And use a reference manager. That's just a practical thing, because if you ever do get something published, usually you have to send it to a bunch of different journals, all of which format their references wrong. It's much easier if you have them in a reference manager, something like EndNote, because then you just have to pull down, change the journal, and it changes all your references for you. But again, start small. There are many little publications. Even, for example, Stroke, which is a very high-tier journal, has a brief communication section. Start with a case report. That's what I would recommend. And once you get kind of a little taste of success, you'll realize how exciting it is to do this. We all know how busy you are, and this is not going to be done as part of your job. A lot of times this is the stuff you have to do on weekends and nights. So you have to really be interested in your topic to kind of follow it through. And I think that's it.
Any questions? Feel free to come off mute with *6 if you'd like, or type in a question in the Q&A section. So I will go ahead and let me see if I can.
Everybody fell asleep.
I know. No, that was a great presentation. Thank you so much. Let's see if we can get to our next. Let me bring up slides for our next presenter.
Does PowerPoint be made available to us?
Yes, the PowerPoint will be sent out. I'll combine all the presenters' PowerPoints, and I will email those out to everyone by the end of this week, or hopefully by the end of this week, but be on the lookout for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let me make sure. All right, and our next presenter is going to be Dr. Tia Raymond. Dr. Raymond is a board-certified pediatrician and pediatric cardiologist and is a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics. She received her Bachelor's of Science degree from Pepperdine University and received her medical degree from the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School. She completed her internship and residency in pediatrics at the Children's Medical Center of Dallas and her pediatric cardiology fellowship at the Texas Children's Hospital, Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. Following her cardiology fellowship, she began training in pediatric cardiac intensive care at Texas Children's Hospital. Dr. Raymond?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you, and you should have control of the slides right now.
Okay. Let's see if I do. So how do I advance the
You should be able, just with your up and down arrows.
Up
your
and
keyboard.
down arrows.
Did you accept control?
How do I do that?
So I've given you control. You should get a pop-up.
Yeah, no pop-up.
Okay. I'll go ahead and advance them for you.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. That was a wonderful talk that was just given. I'm not going to be as detailed as that, but that was really, really good. My specific area of focus is pediatrics. I do pediatric cardiac intensive care. I've been involved with Get With the Guidelines, I guess, now for about 8 to 10 years. I first started as a brand new junior faculty member at UT Southwestern and got involved with what was an interest to me at the time, which was ECMO in cardiac arrest patients. And I submitted a data research proposal. It was accepted. I went ahead and analyzed the data set when I received it, and I was able to present a poster of the abstract at a national meeting, and then the publication was actually published in Pediatric Critical Care Medicine. So that was the very first thing that I did as a junior faculty member, and I think that the most important point to my talk, and I think the talk that was just given, is that this isn't something that, only physicians can do. Anybody who works in the hospital environment, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a pharmacist, a respiratory therapist, a nursing student, a medical student, anybody with guidance and mentorship, I think can present and get one of these studies done, even if it's just to present at your own hospital as an abstract. My only disclosures, again, that I've been on the Pediatric Research Task Force for Get With the Guidelines Resuscitation for a number of years. I've been the co-chair for the last year and a half, and as a member of the co-chair of the Pediatric Research Task Force, I'm also a member of the clinical working group, and I've been an author and co-author on a number of publications from Get With the Guidelines Resuscitation. Next slide. Thank you. So, I think the first thing, to think about is to find a topic. The Get With the Guidelines database, with my interest in resuscitation, has 3 different areas: cardiopulmonary arrest database, an acute respiratory compromise database, and a medical emergency team database. This is only with resuscitation. We just heard, a presenter interested in stroke or AFib or heart failure. There are other databases that I'm not going to talk about, but if that's where your interest is in, the process that I'm going to go through is going to be exactly the same. What is your interest? I wouldn't pick something that you're not interested in doing, because as the prior presenter said, you're probably going to be doing this on your free time or on the weekend. So it has to be something that you're interested in. It has to be something that you're passionate about. What questions do you have? I think that there are a lot of, questions that come up that may be important in one hospital but not in another. So what things are you struggling with in your hospital? What things have you started to focus on? Perhaps that can lead you in a direction. And another thing, I think, depending upon, how much time with research and studies that you've done, you may or may not need more help than someone else. And so I think maybe trying to identify a mentor, whether that's at your own facility or whether that's someone else who has an interest in the Get With the Guidelines, perhaps even at another hospital, but finding somebody to do the project with, I think, at least somebody who shares your same passion and interest for a particular topic, I think will help a lot. Next slide, please.
Trying.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so this first slide for people who enter data, I think, if you're a data abstractor, you're pretty intimate with what is in the databases and what is not. If you were to come up with a question, if you were an abstractor, you would probably know immediately either yes, we can answer that question through the elements in the database, or no, we cannot. But for those who don't enter data, which may be some of the people on this call, the first thing to know is what data is collected in all of the different databases. And so what are the data elements? And this is just a slide, and I don't mean for you to be able to read the slide itself, but on the left, at the top on the left is a link to the website where you can access these are the data elements for the Get With the Guidelines resuscitation database. So there's admission and discharge form for all the databases. There's a cardiopulmonary arrest form, and again, acute respiratory compromise form. Next slide, please. And then the final one is the MET team data form. So, you want to know, does the database, can it answer the question you have? And if it can't, after reviewing all the data elements, then perhaps you can rephrase the question. Maybe there's another way to ask that same question. So I think familiarizing yourself with what data is actually collected first is the first step. Next slide, please. Another thing that has already been mentioned is what has been published. You don't want to come up with a question and spend an enormous amount of time on a topic only to find out that after a month of doing this, it's already been done. So the second thing that I would say to do is to go to the website, and there's a link where it says Published Research, to actually look at the research that has already been published from Get With the Guidelines resuscitation. One of the luxuries, and I'm giving away some of my secrets here, but one of the luxuries I have in pediatrics is nothing is ever done first in pediatrics. It's always first done in adults. And so sometimes the best topics that I've come up with are ones that my adult colleagues have already come up with and have asked in the adults. And I say, gosh, that's a great question. I wonder what would happen in pediatrics. Now, the same thing can happen if you're not in pediatrics, and if perhaps you have adult focus. Look at the pediatric articles that have been published and what topics have come out. Perhaps we did think of something before our adult colleagues. So that's the link to published research. There's actually also research proposals that have been accepted through the database, but perhaps yet aren't published. You don't want to spend time on any of those either, because they're unlikely to accept, a proposal that's already been accepted asking the same question. And so the link on the left bottom is for the accepted proposals that you can also review, and which also could be some topics that could stimulate some ideas perhaps. Next slide, please. So how does the research request process work? Well, the first thing that you have to do is submit a research data request form. And that link is here also, that you can fill that out. It's actually a very short form, and it pretty much actually asks the questions that you guys just went over on an abstract. What is the background? What is the hypothesis or question that you're asking? How do you intend to analyze the data? What are the data elements that you need? And what subjects are you wanting? Once the task force receives the research request, it's reviewed. If it's an adult submission, it's reviewed by the adult task force. If it's a pediatric submission, it's reviewed by the pediatric task force. The best thing, I think, with all of the proposals that are accepted is that every accepted proposal will be assigned a liaison from that respective task force. And that person is a person who has probably been involved with Get With the Guidelines, is probably published abstracts, published papers, published posters, and knows a lot about research and how this process works. And that person will be a key person to help you along the way, not necessarily to tell you what to do, but to give you guidance and steps in the right direction. Once you submit the proposal, it generally takes about a month or two in order to receive the data set. Once you receive the data set, then you can begin analysis of the data. You can begin working on abstracts, posters, publications. And it is expected that once you receive the data set, that some type of publication should occur within about 12 months. Now, there's some leeway, if things happen, but I would say it's about 12 months. Next slide, please. This is a link also to a step-by-step process that Get With the Guidelines has on how to submit a proposal, and analyze the data, and then prepare an abstract and a manuscript. There are certain things that must be done. Any abstract that is submitted, any poster, any publication has to be approved by that task force and also the Executive Science Committee for Get With the Guidelines. So that's a process that can take a few months to get all of those okays. Then the poster, abstract, or paper can be submitted to a conference or to a manuscript journal for publication. So you have to think about that ahead of time. If you're trying to get something done for a meeting that's 2 months from now, it's probably not going to happen. So you really need to think ahead and get in your mind, when are the conferences or presentations that I want to shoot for, and is this something that I can answer in that time frame? Next slide, please. This is just something that I wanted to mention because I think this is a wonderful opportunity for those physicians who are early in their training. So this is a grant that is funded by the Get With the Guidelines that if you are going to use their database for research for any resident or fellow or someone who is within 5 years of completing their training or other doctoral professionals. So it's a large amount of money, actually up to $8,000 per project, that you can receive a seed grant for. And I just wanted to mention that the spring deadline is in April on the 30th, and there's another fall deadline, which is September the 30th. But for those who don't have monetary support, this is an excellent way to help get monetary support, which can be used to help design the project, data, statistical analysis, and then also, if your project is accepted to a meeting, it can be used for travel expenses. Next slide, please. This was a talk that, in an abstract and a poster and a manuscript that I presented and is currently in process. One of my interests is medical emergency team response. I was integral in starting this at one of the hospitals that I was previously at. So it was an area that I was, involved in daily, and so it was something that I was very interested in. And so I thought, let me look at the data in the database, and so I submitted a data request for looking at the MET, pediatric MET, and it was a descriptive project. I received the data set, we analyzed the data, and formulated an abstract. The abstract was accepted and submitted to the resuscitation conference for the AHA this past November. There's a link to the abstract which goes over it's just an example, goes over a lot of the things that you guys just heard in the prior presentation with a background, an objective, your methods, results, and then conclusion. And there's a link to that abstract that's there. Once the abstract was accepted, it was actually accepted for poster presentation. So this was just an example of my poster. And again, there's a link to where you can actually see it and read it in bigger time. And again, it's a PowerPoint slide that you can use, and this is also one of the Get With the Guidelines logos at the top. So this went from abstract to poster, and then it is currently in progress that we're writing a manuscript. I've written the manuscript thus far, and the authors are currently reviewing it. Once all of the authors on the manuscript have approved it, we'll then submit it to the Pediatric Research Task Force. So this is something that I started, some things take a long time. I started this probably 2 years ago. So this has been a long process, and I probably won't have a finished process, I would say, for another 6 months to even a year. So again, very important to make it be something you're interested in, something that you're focused on, and something that you really want to know an answer to, because if you're going to do it and do it right, it's going to take a while to get some of these questions answered, not all of them. Next slide. I think that might have been the last slide. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. I am more than happy. I have more topics in my head and ideas than I have time for. I work in a private hospital, and I don't have fellows and residents and medical students, so it's hard for me to find people to do some of the work. So if you have a topic or an interest, if you need guidance, I'm here to help. And if I can think of somebody in the field perhaps who has maybe your same interests or ideas, please contact me. If you need help with any of these steps, please contact me. This is something that I'm passionate about, resuscitation research. So if that's your passion, please, get involved and just, do something simple. As the prior presenter said, present, at something at your hospital, a research day at your hospital. It doesn't have to be, the American Heart Association national meeting. It doesn't have to be that at all. So pick something that is of interest to you, something that you want an answer to, and we will find the people who can help you get it done. Thank you.
Any questions? Comments? Again, *6 to unmute your line.
That was actually really interesting because I had no idea that they had those seed grants. So, hey, that's fantastic. I learned something. I'm going to make some of the nurses and people start querying this data.
Perfect.
Yeah, and having been someone who reviewed the last cycle of seed grants, they're probably, I think I reviewed 2 or 3. So you're only talking about maybe, 10 to 15 people you're competing against. So it's not like it's thousands of submissions. And somebody has to get it. So, it's a great, great idea.
That is.
And you got time to meet the April deadline, I bet.
Great. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to our next presenter. Our next presenter is Melissa Grace. She earned her BSN from the University of Kansas in 1999 and is currently working on her MSN through the University of Kansas with an anticipated graduation date of this July. She currently works as a stroke coordinator for Shawnee Medical Center. Shawnee is actually a Get With The Guidelines hospital, but Melissa's project doesn't use Get With The Guidelines data. We wanted to make sure that we gave y'all 2 examples of projects using Get With The Guidelines data and projects using their own data. So Melissa, if you'd like to go ahead. She's still there? You can unmute your line with *6, Melissa. Can't hear you.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes, gotcha.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me and great presentations earlier. As she said, my project did not use Get With The Guidelines, although I too have a million projects in my head that I could use Get With The Guidelines for. Mine kind of started off in a different sort of direction. I was not planning on getting into any research. I was doing my job as a stroke coordinator, and my boss said, "You're going to submit an abstract for International Stroke Conference, aren't you?" And I'm like, yes, I am. So that's kind of how mine got started. So when you're looking at something, it's easy to go ahead and do something that you're already working on. So like everybody else said, start small. Don't pick some big, lofty project, especially if you're doing this on your own. I don't work for an academic facility either, so it's pretty much just me doing this job here. So my project revolved around an educational offering that I had, doing simulation to enhance nurses' skills with the NIH stroke scale. So I had already completed that education when my boss pretty nicely asked me to submit this abstract, and I thought, you know what, I can do something with that. That was a really great educational offering. It was something that needed to be done that we didn't know needed to be done, and how can I use that? So it was pretty easy. I'd already done the education, so I just took the evaluation data that I had. We had the nurses rate how well they felt like they performed before and after. We had some pretty interesting results. We'd had all of these nurses who had been stroke scale certified for years and years and were passing the certification exam annually that really weren't able to apply that in real-life practice. So we found a lot during this educational offering that it was pretty easy for me to kind of put together and say, hey, what are we doing here, and being able to correlate that. So when you're looking for something to do, pretty just much start small. It didn't have to be big. Like I said, I'd done this education and was able to go with that. Also, best practice. If you're using something that's considered best practice, we all know what the best practice is, but it's not always easy to implement that. So you can write up something about that. How did you incorporate this best practice into your hospital environment? That's always great because everybody's looking and trying to figure out how to get that incorporated in, and it's not always easy. And, if you're also just kind of wondering what to do and not sure even where to start attending conferences that have abstract and poster presentations, or read through abstracts in the journals and just get a good idea to go from there. Do you have control of my slides, or do I?
There you go. I just moved it.
So then writing the abstract, that's kind of the scary part. What I started with was just reading through a bunch of accepted abstracts. So I went through the previous year's International Stroke Conference abstracts, read through them, clearly not all of them, but the ones that were kind of pertinent to me and to nursing especially, to see how they were written up. Don't be afraid to submit them. You're very, very easily could get denied the first time you do it or the first couple of times, but don't let that discourage you. Really nobody has to know that you got denied but you, so it's not a big deal. Keep working at it. And you never know where you're going to take it. So I did this little project and submitted this abstract for Stroke Conference last year, got that accepted, which was really, really exciting. And then it happened to be in the middle of this last year. I was contacted again by American Heart Association. They said, you know what, your abstract from your stroke conference was in the top 10% of the abstracts for the year. We want you to bring this down to scientific sessions. So I had no idea that they did that, and that was fantastic. So I got to take it to scientific sessions. So I got 2 presentations out of my one abstract, was able to look at everybody else's science and get ideas. So when you're looking at everybody else's posters, you're thinking, oh, wow, we do something like that already, or I could do something like that, and it gives you all of these ideas of where to go from there. Networking is important. So when you're going to these conferences, talk to people. How did you do that? A lot of the conferences, especially like International Stroke Conference, have topics on research and how to get started in that. So that networking is really important. When I was at Stroke Conference last year, I met up with another doctor from another hospital within our health system, and we worked together with some other hospitals this year on a door-to-needle challenge and have that accepted for presentation next week at this year's Stroke Conference. So when I was able to hook up with him, we were able to combine our network together and do some work as well. And he's going to work with us on getting that published as well, the work with that published. So network, meet people, tell people you're interested. People are always looking for help, too. If you've got an idea or they're working on something that's interesting to you, people are looking for help. And if you can just get your foot started and see how that goes, you can move a long ways from there. So you want to go to my next slide? So this is just a copy of my poster from last year at the Stroke Conference. So as you can see, it was pretty simple, enhancing stroke nursing education through simulation, and really just looking at the response we had. How did nurses feel they were doing before? How are they doing after? And really looking at what the benefit of that educational session was. So it was a pretty simple idea, but it took me a long ways with that and really got me started in this direction. When I took it to scientific session, I was very humbled because there was all of these great basic science abstracts around me. I mean, just really looking at mice brains and detailed stuff, and here I've got my nurse simulation. But so many people stopped and said, you know what, this is real life stuff, like this is great, you did a great job with this. So it made me feel more confident in my abilities and to move forward with this. But yeah, it felt like, I was just doing this education, and now I've taken this poster to a couple different places. So it's been a lot of fun. And there is my contact info as well. If you have any questions at all or want to know how to get started, I am happy to resource you as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions? *6 again will unmute if we have any questions for Melissa. Okay. We'll go ahead and move on. Becky, with our Quality Research Publications Department for the American Heart Association, was not able to join us today, but she did send her slides ahead of time. We'll briefly go over those. It's been covered already with the presenters that we had today. Go ahead and, so these just go over the Guidelines Publications policies. So when you're developing or signing and approving an abstract with Get With The Guidelines data, kind of the policies that you need to follow in order to get it approved. So when using a single center data for an abstract or manuscript, this is the review and approval process. So if you're using single center abstract data and it mentions Get With The Guidelines in any way or includes any national aggregated data, then you must go ahead and review, it must be sent to AHA for review and approval prior to your submission. So in general, it kind of talks about the turnaround times. It will have to be sent to the Get With The Guidelines Science Subcommittee and Steering Committee in order to get approved. They'll look at what data you're using with Get With The Guidelines, your acknowledgments, and your data source disclosures. At the bottom of the slide, you can see the turnaround times. So for abstracts, it's approximately 7 business days, and for manuscripts, it's approximately 14 business days to get these approved. Once something is approved and accepted to a conference, you will need to actually use AHA-approved templates for posters or PowerPoints. And then your final poster or PowerPoint will need to go through the same review process that you did with your data. Also, notification of accepted manuscripts to the targeted journal should be made to your AHA Get With The Guidelines staff when you send the final accepted version of the publication. We also give you the website to view a complete library of Get With The Guidelines published research. So there's your web link for that. And you also have the contact information for Laura Shuey and Becky in case you have any additional information. And when I send out the list of slides, I'll also include the information for your local Get With The Guidelines representative. And please make sure to reach out to those local Get With The Guidelines representatives. They can help you walk through the process also and answer any questions that you might have. If you'd like, you can unmute your line, *6, to ask any questions to our wonderful panel of speakers. Questions, comments? Everyone ready to go do an abstract or poster now? Everyone feel more comfortable and confident in completing one? Anyone still on the line?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so what if our facility doesn't have like a research nurse or someone that's specialized in that? And for me, for example, this would be me just starting out doing this. It's like you guys had already said, it's intimidating to start.
Mm-hmm.
So is there another resource that you can think of that might be helpful in the hospital setting without a research nurse?
I would go ahead and I would reach out to your local Get With The Guidelines representative and see if they might be able to help find you a mentor. I believe we discussed earlier how finding mentors in other hospitals who might have the same interest is also a route to go. Louise, anyone have a suggestion for her?
Any questions?
Any other questions?
Not from me, but thank you so much for everybody who spoke.
You're welcome.
Sure.
Thank you.
And you should be able to get our slides.
Yeah, that'll be really helpful.
Yes, we will be sending out the slides so y'all have that to reference back to.
Great.
And the list of your local Get With The Guidelines person, too. Any other questions? *6 to unmute your line, or you can type it in via the question section of GoToMeeting. Okay, any other questions or comments from our panelists? Thank y'all so much for taking your time and presenting today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Our pleasure. Or my pleasure. I shouldn't speak for others. All righty.
Yep. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. Look, I'll be sending this